Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled Poppie. I've got a book out. It's called The Ninth Hour, but you can find it on my website. You can also find my serialized novel, One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet, on my website. I would actually recommend that you go there for everything. If you want to follow me on social media, you can. Quick note on social media. So I go through stages of being on social media and then being off of it. I am maybe not normal with social media. I'm not sure. Maybe this is the norm. Social media is set up to be an addiction. It's set up to essentially spike endorphins in your brain every time you get likes and shares. It's set up to do that. That's how it works. That's why you like it. So when most people go on, they put something up, they get likes and shares, and then they have a good feeling about it. They're like, oh yeah, 25 people like this, 25 people shared this. But for me, there isn't an amount. I actually do the opposite. I get more nervous. I get anxious. It's really funny. So if I get 300 likes and shares, I wouldn't actually feel good about it, which is a bit of not a paradox. It's a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? So I don't really like it because I've never really liked attention. So for me, you'll probably just see these podcasts coming out. For me, I've been taking a break from social media pretty much fully, and I've just been putting out when podcasts are coming out on my social media networks, just because I'm sick of social media. I'm sick of Instagram. I'm sick of Twitter. Share my stuff, like my stuff, but I'm not very active. If you want to get in touch with me, I'll check my Instagram once in a while. I just don't like it. What's the other thing? Yeah, go to my website, danielpoppy.com, if you want to find out anything. You can look at it at the links in the bottom, whatever, something like that. I thought there was something else I was going to say too. I'm tired. It's fine. Everybody's tired. You just deal with it. Going to get even more tired as time goes on, and that's life. Do we even have a word of the week? So last night actually, my wife and a friend of ours talked about different hyphens between words, and this isn't a word of the week, but this is a fun fact of the week, and I guess I do this. So I guess it's more archaic, old-timey, oldstery, if you want to use those words, because those are common words to use. It's more archaic to use hyphens between words that have now become compound words, like roommates or housemates or bandmates or etc. like that. But now it's the case that you mash them together, you young people. I think it's maybe the case that I've read a lot of older books. We read a lot. I read like Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson and Robinson Crusoe, stuff like that. The Count of Monte Cristo. What are some other things that fall into that area? But yeah, so hyphens are more archaic, and eventually they just disappear, and then you have just a word with compound word. Thing about hyphens that I enjoy is that you can pretty much put as many words together as you want, and that's one thing I enjoy about German, is that you can pretty much stick as many words together as you want, and it's actually correct grammar in German, because Germany and Germans are insane, but I kind of like it. That's never mind. We won't go into Germany anymore. Very interesting historical things. Well, every culture, Germany. The thing about Germany is that it was videotaped during World War II with the Nazis. It was videotaped, and no time in history has. And you had stuff in the more modern day that was videotaped, but there was never a country that was mobilized for conquest in the same way that Germany has been. That was in World War II. Some people might say, well, the U.S. is mobilized for conquest and they take over places, but they have bases in areas. We're pulling out of it. We have bases pretty much we have bases in Japan. We have bases in Germany, but they're running themselves. We're not taking money from them and bringing it over to the U.S. I don't think we are, but there's been no country. There's been no country that has been videotaped except Germany. And, some people think that there's never going to be a war like that again because of the fact that we have nuclear weapons, which I'm not sure about. Maybe it's the case that if we have nuclear weapons, that's not going to happen. But there's been other times in history when people have mobilized in that way. It's just the technology hasn't been as great. There hasn't been so you couldn't mobilize, you couldn't take over a continent as easily. But there's certainly been countries. Now the annihilation of a specific group of people, mainly, namely the Jews during World War II, I don't know if it's happened to the same extent it had in World War II, right? And in the same way, and in such a technologically advanced way. We, for whatever reason, people think that just because we advance technologically, we advance morally as well, but they're not synonymous, and they're just because they don't go hand in hand. And we saw that in World War II, and we've seen that in other areas of the world where people have used because you can use technology to kill and be an evil person, and we've seen that happen. But the thing about, I think, World War II that's so unnerving is that there's this idea in the heads of people that people progress morally and technologically. Everything is moving forward. Everything is getting better, which isn't necessarily the case. But in the history of the world, you had ancient civilizations and more recent civilizations that would come in, and they you look at the Mongols, you look at the Assyrians, so I'll go to the Mongols first. The Mongols would, from what I understand, would come in and they would be like, "Hey, are you going to surrender to us or not?" And if people didn't surrender, they just slaughter them. So they had a big fear factor when they came into the area. The Assyrians were really brutal conquerors, from what I understand, and the Babylonians, people liked, I believe, so it's either one or the other, but one of them was really bad, and then the Babylonians still were pretty rough, because that was just how people worked in the ancient world. The Babylonians were still pretty rough, but people liked them better because they didn't kill as many people and they weren't as cruel. Fun fact about history. But yeah, so just because things get better, just because things are getting better technologically doesn't necessarily mean that people are getting more moral or better, or things won't turn out catastrophically in the future. We just have this sense that it will. The United States is a very big force for good, I think, in the world, and I think it holds things in check. But there are players in the world that I think wouldn't. I think that it's generally the case the United States does a good job, and there's definitely issues with it, but it's not a force for evil in fully like other countries or other places have been. All right, we're going to jump into, and this is just a side note, fun fact. Hope you find it interesting. But yeah, so evil has existed in the Germans with their language and the insanity that comes from Germany. Germany's kind of been tamed. Taking over Europe, though. They're taking over Europe again. They just can't keep their hands off of it. Sorry. I'm going to go to our accent or lessons. So I'm going to be talking about doing something that other people won't do. So one thing I've noticed, and one thing that I pride myself in, is that I'm often places, whether mentally or what I'm working on, like creatively or physically, that there are no other people. And some people would say, oh, that's not a good thing because you need people to do something. So there's two thoughts to this. Okay. This is let's just think of it from a business perspective, but then we're going to shift it to more with writing and with life in general. So from a business perspective, you can be in two different places. You can be in more than two different places, but these are two sides of the spectrum, if you will. You could be in the place where everybody is. When you start a business, you go out and you look at what other people are doing. You look at what's working, and then you copy what those people are doing, and then hopefully that stuff works. And since it's working for other people, it is working for you. So I would say that this is just kind of taking on the paradigm of the time and running with the paradigm of the time. Now, some of you right now, there might be something spiking in your brain with businesses where you're like, well, there's been a lot of businesses that have existed for a very long time, probably take on that attitude. Now, I have one more thing to say about that, but businesses that are startups that just spring from nowhere, just get huge, oftentimes they are a completely different thing altogether. So if we take the most recent and huge revolution in the world has been the computing revolution that happened in the, 70s, 80s, something like that. And it was the case that computers weren't used for personal use in the home. And then Apple, I believe it was Apple, I'm not going to say with certainty because I don't have it in front of me, but Apple said, oh, well, what we're going to do, we're going to actually make a computer, we're going to market it as, I believe they marketed it as a toy for kids at first, I believe. But they marketed it for the home. And there wasn't anybody in that space. They were the first people, they were the forerunners, and then you had other people coming and getting into that space after them. But Apple was the first. Apple has done a lot of things in the past that they've been the first at. They've done it exceedingly well. So they did the personal computer, and the funny thing about Apple is it used to be the case that it does more, cost less, and now it is Apple where we own your technology and it costs more. Because in a lot of cases I believe they own your technology, they own your phone, they own your whatever, you sign it over to them. I'm sorry. I'm not impressed at all by Apple now. I'm not impressed at all by Apple now. But yeah, so Apple had the iPod, and the iPad is similar, but I don't really count that. So Apple had the iPod, and this was revolutionary, or the iPhone, right? It was like, hey, we're going to, and seriously, like Apple let me think. So there's a few things. So Apple revolutionized the music and how music was shared because they're like, hey, we're going to make this digital. And digital stuff was coming up. If you remember LimeWire, if you're as old as me, there was a website that was called LimeWire where you could pretty much pirate whatever you wanted. And it was just ridden with viruses and different things like that. But you could pretty much get whatever song you wanted because it was funneled through this site called LimeWire. Good old LimeWire, gone now. Those were the days, the Wild West of the internet. But now everything is digital. I rarely ever buy CDs, which in some cases is probably good for the musician, because if they can connect straight to Spotify, they can pay for their stuff to be put on. Then they get a royalty from every time that song is played. That's good for them. It's going straight to the musician's pocket. It enables musicians, and maybe they wouldn't be making as much as if they sold a hard copy, but maybe people will listen more because of the fact that they're listening digitally on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever they're listening. And so I think that's probably a good thing for the musician because it allows them to do that. And the good thing is that there's actually competition. So it revolutionized that, and I think that in a way the iPhone revolutionized the phone industry, because before we had flip phones, there was a BlackBerry. Gosh, can you think about using a BlackBerry, honestly, and how futzy they are? And how, I remember Palm Pilots. I had a friend, and his dad was a physician's assistant, and I remember he got a Palm Pilot. And it looks like, if you remember the Windows tablets, my roommate in college, freshman year, had a Windows tablet PC, because he didn't have enough money to buy like a whatever you call it, a computer, but he had a tablet PC he got from somebody or whatever. It was really old, but it was awesome. It was amazing. And now he can buy whatever he wants. But yeah, so you remember those Palm Pilots, and they had those little styluses. And then Apple's like, hey, we're going to make a phone that is a touchscreens. Touchscreens were something that was revolutionary. Another thing, a lot of other things were the streaming services. Netflix just starting a streaming service. There's all these things that are revolutionary. So you can decide to go where other people are going, or you can try to go somewhere that other people are going to be. Or here's the thing: you don't even go where other people are. You're creating something. You're creating a space that other people are going to be. That's how creativity, I think, works. Like true creativity that does change the world. It goes places that don't even exist yet, and it creates those spaces. Apple created a space for the personal computer. They saw, hey, we can put this in a house. That space didn't exist yet. It was just open. It was open, but nobody else even saw it. And then Apple was like, hey, we're going to make this iPod, this digital music player, and you're just going to have all your music in your pocket. And then they went on, they created the iPhone. And they're like, hey, you're going to have a computer in your pocket now. And your phone too. So they really, they went places. They created a space that didn't exist before, and in some cases, so some businesses don't change much. Things that create physical objects, in some cases, don't change much depending. For example, it's likely that furniture is going to stay similar to how it's been for a very long time, because people have physical bodies and people like cushiony, comfy things. So people are going to like cushiony, comfy furniture, and maybe the process of the furniture is going to change, but the outcome isn't going to change. We like things that look nice. We like things that are comfortable. We maybe like things that are easy to clean, right? But with any business, you have to find ways to change before before everything changes ahead of you. So you have to have foresight, and it might not be that you're making something new like Apple did, which kudos to them. It might not be that you're making something new. It might be that you are changing how you're doing something, that you are, and it could be the way you run your business, right? It could be the human resources side of the business where you are changing how people work. For example, I think that in the future, people are going to do a lot more remote work, which I think is good. I think people are more productive when they're remote, and people are happy when they're remote. I think people are willing to actually get paid less if they're able to work from home because they can get their stuff done faster and they can see their families and different things like that. So I think that's something that could potentially happen depending on the work. I mean, some work you have to be somewhere. But besides that, I think that you can also change how people interact. I think that these smaller artisan businesses. So the one I point to right now is the craft brewery. This is something that people want, and something that existed before. But these big breweries, for whatever godforsaken reason, came along, and these big breweries kind of took over the market. But now these craft breweries, or these people like artisan things that are created. People like handmade things because there's more quality to them, almost always. If you get a handmade cup, you get a ceramic cup that's handmade versus one that isn't, there's just a different quality to it. If you get a real painting, there's a different quality to it. If you get a piece of furniture that someone made, there's a different quality to it, there's more satisfaction in owning it because you know somebody put work into it, and there was one person through the whole entire process. And I think that there's a resurgence of things happening like that. I think there's a resurgence in the market. And I think there are people who still buy cheaper things that are mass produced, but there is more and more of the market's getting taken over by these artisan things, these artisan, not crafts, but creations, if you want to call it that. So even when you're looking back, even when you're looking at the modern day, you could have something from the past that comes back. Like I said, like the beer. Beer used to be brewed on a smaller scale. There were these breweries that got really big. For whatever reason, they took over the market. Now these smaller breweries are coming back. But my point is that you can be on two sides of something. You can be on the side that is doing things how everybody else is doing it, or you can be on the side of things that is trying to find spaces that don't even exist yet and creating those spaces. And I think this is very related to writing, extremely. I think this is extremely applicable to anything creative, but especially to writing. My wife was talking to me about this guy who she met. I think she met him, and he's like, yeah, so I used to write this, but I decided to write crime fiction. And the reason why he decided to write crime fiction is because there's a market for crime fiction, right? So he is someone I would expect that says, hey, where can you make money off of this? And where should I go? And then he's like, well, there's a lot of money in crime fiction. There's a lot of money in romances and stuff like that, or genre fiction. There's money in genre fiction. Okay. Now, if you want to make something that's more literary, there is still a genre. There's still a niche for that, but I think it's a much smaller niche. You have things like The Road, and The Road is literary fiction. It's science fiction, but I think it's literary fiction at its core with a science fiction veneer, whatever, on the surface. But it's written in a different way, and I wasn't the greatest fan of it, but at the same time, I can see its merits. Another book similar to The Road that I would recommend The Road. I would recommend that. I would recommend. My wife recommended this to me, Station 11, which feels like a companion novel to The Road, but it's more of a literary fiction novel. And literary fiction is something where you can make a lot of money, but I think it is a smaller niche. I think it's harder to get into than genre fiction. Genre fiction is like science fiction, romance, western. What else would I fit in? Crime novels, crime thriller, horror is a genre fiction. Stephen King is a genre writer. John Grisham is a genre writer. They write a specific thing. Clive Cussler, I don't know how to say his name. Clive Cussler is a genre writer because he writes adventure stories that are really thrillers. He writes thrillers, and he just writes over and over again these thrillers. And that's where the money is, and that's where people are. And that's someone who is saying, hey, I see where the money is. I see what works in this industry, and I'm going to go toward that space. I'm going to work toward that, and I'm going to make money off of this or whatever. Or I'm going to be successful because I'm following a well-laid path. I'm going to follow that path that's been well laid, and that's perfectly fine. But what I recommend, now you may be someone who's like, hey, I write genre fiction, and that's what I do, and I think it works best for me, and I'm okay with it. That's perfectly fine. But one thing I suggest in your writing, one thing I suggest in your life, and one thing I suggest in all areas of your life is take a road, do things that others are unwilling to do. Take a road that other people don't take. Even in one thing, maybe you have a really high anxiety level, and maybe it's the case that you just get through the day, right? Maybe you just get through the day, and that's okay. But think about, hey, what's one thing that other people don't do that I could do? One thing that most people I don't think do is exercise daily. Some people say that I have a friend who says that exercising is worthless because if you have an active hobby, you don't need to exercise daily. But it could be the case that, one thing that people don't do is exercise daily. One thing I notice that people don't do is they don't just write when they hate it. And this is something that I always struggle with. I always try to write when I just say I'm going to write. I write when I'm going to write, and that's when I write. I don't complain, or I don't try to complain. But sometimes you don't feel it. And that's one thing I suggest to people to do. Some people say, hey, I don't have time to write. Well, most people aren't writing. Most people aren't taking time to write. Most people aren't taking time to create anything, I would actually say. But what you can do is you can start with 5 sentences, because you're doing something that other people are unwilling to do, or the majority of people are unwilling to do. The majority of people aren't willing to sit down and write 5 sentences. I think a lot of people are just starting out, make a lot of excuses. And it's easy to make excuses, and some excuses are legitimate. Sometimes you have a really hard life, but you've just got to suck it up, essentially, and you've got to move through your life, and you've got to deal with it, because in some cases you will not have support, and that's really sad. And it might be the case that you have a really bad family, and I feel for you. That's tough. It might be the case that you are not married, and that's really tough. It might be the case that you don't have any friends. Maybe you moved to a new area. Maybe your friends sucked, or maybe you just realized your friends weren't good friends, and you just are like, hey, I've got to move on. That stinks. That's the worst. That sucks. I feel for you. But at the same time, if you want to do something, you have to try to figure out how to make those excuses because those are weaknesses, right? Those are areas that are gaps in your life, and you've got to figure out a way to make those into strengths. One thing I do, and it's no, what would I call it? It is no, I don't remember, secret. That's it. It's no secret that I have a high anxiety level. I've said it many times. Now, the thing about it is that there's been a lot of times where I've been like, hey, I'm making this into an excuse, where I'm just like, yeah, like I am anxious, I don't want to do this, or I'm worried about this, I can't get this stuff out of my head, so I don't want to do it, or I can't break my brain, I can't get my brain from somewhere else to where I need it to be, so I don't want to do it. And in some cases, it's extremely difficult. But when I realize, and it's still a daily thing that I have to deal with, when I realize that, hey, maybe it's the case that your worry allows you to assess things in a different way than other people aren't. So you use that worry, maybe start with that worry when you're writing. And I've talked about this before. If you're in a bad mood, start with whatever mood you're in. Start with whatever thoughts you're in with writing, and then work on that writing. And after you work on that writing, you're going to eventually get that sort through that, you're going to process through that information, and then you're eventually going to be able to write what you need to write, because writing is cathartic. Writing helps you emotionally. At least I think it does. Some people can't write. Some people do other things. If writing isn't your thing, writing isn't your thing. But I think this applies to anything. If you are someone who, and it doesn't have to be something big. Life, and I've heard this, and I don't know if it's true, but I do think it's true. I do think this is true. Everything in life is compound interest. And what compound interest is where you keep on adding a little bit at a time. And that little bit builds on a little bit, builds on a little bit. And there's been people who've done research into very, very successful people, and they found out that there's a lot of work over a long period of time put into what they've done, and they become successful because of compound interest, because it's built up, because it's built on itself, it's kept on going. And it might be the case you're starting at zero. That's okay. Find something, and it doesn't have to be with writing. It can be with writing, it can be with anything creative, but it might be something related to your social life. For example, if you are a writer, first of all, if you want to be a writer and you want to be an indie writer, you need to get a social life because you need people around you, because you're never going to make, you might make it. Okay, I'm not going to say you're never going to make it. You might make it as an indie writer with nobody around you to help you, but it's very, very unlikely. So good luck. But it might be the case that you just try to have one good conversation with someone once a week, and that's it. Just a real conversation. Or maybe it's the case that you're just trying to meet one person new, and you're just trying to get a few things about them. And it might be the case that you're socially awkward. It might be the case that you worry a lot when you get around new people. Maybe you can just have a texting conversation. Maybe you can just have a conversation online with someone, as opposed to being alone. It might be the case that here's an example. So there's this lady, and I have no idea who she is. My mother was telling me about her a while back. And my mom was saying, hey, this lady decided her house was in a mess. Her house was just completely messy. And she decided, I'm gonna clean for 15 minutes, or I think it was 5 minutes a day. I'm going to clean for 5 minutes a day, and every single day I'm going to clean for 5 minutes. And it built up on itself where she was just maintaining the house 5 minutes a day. And the house ended up being immaculate because she just put in that 5 minutes. So is there something that you can do in your life that only takes 5 minutes that is going to improve your life? It could be the case that you're just going to sit and you're not going to do anything. It could be the case that you want to read. You want to get through books. You want to read more books. Maybe it's going to be the case that you're going to read for 5 minutes. And maybe it's going to be the case that you can extend it to a half an hour eventually, and you can get through like a book a month or more. Maybe you can get through like 3 books a month. But I think it's something that it's something that's come up in my mind, and it's something that I always try to do things that other people aren't doing. I always try to, because a lot of people will say, well, that's too hard. That sounds like work, this or that, or this or that. There's all these excuses. And at the very least, I want to do more than those people who are saying that. Because at the very least, I'll be ahead of them. And that sounds bad, but at the same time, it's just like, you've got to start somewhere. And you might find that you don't really, so let's just say you want to get into writing. And you get into writing and you're saying, hey, I'm just going to put 5 minutes aside. I'm going to write 5 sentences a day. 5 sentences is itty bitty. And you find out that you're like, man, I really hate this writing thing. Well, at the very least, you found it out, And if you do something else in your life and you put barely any time into it, but it's just that extra step above what other people are doing, that extra step beyond what other people are doing, you're going to be further than them. You're going to be further than them, but you're going to find out if you like that thing. One thing, I helped with a wrestling team a few years back, not very long, but one of the coaches, he wrestled in college, and he said, yeah, so when we won things, when we were doing stuff in practice and we won, our reward was more exercise, because the attitude was, hey, we're going to keep on going above and beyond so we're showing ourselves to be even more capable. So I can't remember, there's a basketball player, and he's a big basketball player. He's like one of the best free throwers. I don't know. He's really good at shooting baskets. I have no idea because I'm not into basketball, but somebody who is can tell me. But when everybody else left, he just shot, I think he shot 100 free throws that he made, or 100 baskets that he made, or three-pointers, something like that. So he's really, really good at doing that. He's better than everybody else because he put in the time. And it might not be that you're shooting 100, but that extra time you put in does do something. It's not unless you're taking extra time to eat extra food or something like that, it's going to do something. If you read 5 minutes a day, or even if you just stop and you sit, I think that's going to have an effect on you. And I can't say for certain if it is, but I think it's going to, because stopping and thinking and just relaxing, just taking time where you're actually doing absolutely nothing, is something that can affect you, that can get things going in your mind. Reading, writing, painting, you just stop for a few minutes, you paint 5 minutes, keep on going. Maybe it's some skill you want to learn, do that skill. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe it's something related to your relationships, you stop and you talk for just 5 minutes. You really connect to someone. You ask them how they're doing. Different things like that. But the thing about it, it's just look around. What are other people doing? Go beyond what they're doing. Go beyond what they're trying. Do something that other people, because most people aren't willing to write. Most people aren't willing to start a business. Most people aren't willing to be entrepreneurs. Most people aren't willing to do the bare minimum with those things, I think. Most people, if you want to make music, you take 5 minutes a day, you write a tune, you keep on working on it. I don't know. I think that it's something really helpful just to take the one step beyond what everybody else is doing, because you can see, here's the thing, and then I'm done after this. No logical fallacy, I'm done. Here's the thing. We can see ourselves doing what those around us are doing, okay? Especially those in our family. We pattern ourselves after what those we know do. That's what we see our capabilities as. And when we do one step above what other people we know are doing, we are going beyond what we understand our capabilities to be, but we see it as possible. And if you can see yourself doing one step beyond, and then you've been doing that for a month, maybe a year, and you go one step beyond that, you keep on building up until you get beyond what the people you know are doing. Because I know from personal experience, and I know if someone else looks at their life, they'll realize that, hey, if it was easy for you to do something, it's likely that you had someone that you patterned yourself after. You had a structure to build off of. If you didn't do it before, if nobody in your family has ever done anything related to what you're doing now, you might have a bit of anxiety, and it might be the case that you need to take slower steps. One thing that I want to push out to people is that you are probably not going to fulfill all your goals. I'm not going to fulfill all my goals. Still hold on to those goals. I think I had an episode that was talking about having children, and I think that it is the case that if you have children, you have to think into the future more. And I would, people my age, I think it's harder to have kids. And I think it's harder to have kids because it's been harder to get jobs for people my age, and it's harder to get stable financially. They just feel in an uproar. But at the same, and people make so many excuses for not having children, and people make this excuse that, if you have kids, you're selfish, which I actually I don't think is true at all, because if you don't have kids, you can make more money. If you don't have kids, you don't have to worry about expenses. You don't have to worry about what might happen with their lives. And everybody I know who has kids says it is a lot of hard work, and it takes a lot of your time, and you'd never sleep again, which doesn't sound so selfish if you're giving your time to somebody else. But what I think you need to do in your life, and I think this is something that is going to be beneficial and it's going to give you more hope and meaning, is find someone younger than you or have children yourself, and you see your life as making their lives better. You're setting a foundation up for them rather than just for yourself. Here's a fun fact. People will actually give medicine to their animals and to the people they care for more often than they give it to themselves. And it's because they're responsible for those people and they want what's best for them. Now, I want you to take a little bit of a different. I want you to take on a little bit of a different idea. So you may not fulfill all your goals if you have kids, or even if you just take on some other younger person and you're mentoring them and you're just investing in their life long term, like for the rest of their life. You may not fulfill all your goals. In that position where you're mentoring someone, or you're having your own children, or you're taking on nieces and nephews, or just someone's kids and they need help or something like that, you are laying a pattern for them that they're probably going to use to build their life, and they're going to probably use the information you give them, and they're probably going to take it seriously, especially if you have a good relationship with that younger person. What I would suggest is that you don't give up on what you want to do with your life. Because what those younger people will see is that, hey, these people that I look up to haven't given up. Even if they weren't successful, they haven't given up on what they wanted to do with their life. At the very least, you're not successful. But you show those younger people the persistence. You show them a grit that they may have not seen otherwise. And at the most, you are successful, and they say, hey, I know this person. I know how they work. I know who they are. I think I can do what they can do. And they've done all this stuff. Now, being successful in your job isn't the end all be all for life. This extends beyond that, right? So if someone sees a marriage that, they had a rough time, but the people got through it, then the younger people, the people that these older people are mentoring, or their children, they're going to say, hey, those people got through a really hard time in their marriage. I can get through a really hard time in my marriage. Or, sacrifice. Sacrifice isn't often in people's vocabulary, but if you see your parents or someone you look up to sacrificing a lot, especially for you say you somehow are like, hey, I can sacrifice for other people. You gain that understanding. You somehow are like, yeah, they figured it out. I can figure it out too. And that goes to anything. If you see someone who, in the middle of their life, they suddenly start a business and they've never done anything like that before, you're like, wow, I'm capable of that too. You're patterning yourself after that. So don't give up. If you have kids, or if you mentor someone, or if you have nieces and nephews, don't give up on your dreams. Because I think it's going to be, because some people think, oh, I'm giving up on my dreams, but I'm taking care of these other little people. Don't give up on your dreams, because those other little people are going to see what you're doing, and it's going to affect them in a big way. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support me more, what I would ask you to do is that you go to iTunes and you leave a 5-star review. That is something that really, really helps me and helps push the podcast out to different people. And it's something that doesn't cost you much time at all. So if you would do that, I would really appreciate that. And I definitely appreciate everyone who listens to this podcast. If you ever listen to this podcast and you have questions, or you have topics you would like me to cover, you can send those to me and I'll look them over, and I'll see which ones I think I can cover intelligently. And if you just want to reach out for anything at all, you can do that as well. Thanks for your time. My name is Daniel Poppy, and as always, this is How to Write Good.